All right, if you're back in action here with Mr. DeCecco, we're going to take you through the United States involvement in World War One. All right. First off, you got to know, I mean, the war went from 1914 to 1918, but the United States does not get involved until 1917. All right. If you've seen any images of World War One, you'll certainly be looking at tanks and trench warfare and the types of war what was fought. So we'll take a quick peek at the causes of the actual war and then the causes of the United States entering that war. So the first one is militarism, and if you've been in any good history class, they're probably talking about the main causes of the actual war. So the first one is militarism, and that is that countries were building up their armies and navies and storing large caches of weapons and just getting ready in case something happens. All right. The other major cause was the two alliances that were being formed in Europe kind of led to an unstable region, and that would be Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy kind of tied together, and now they're known as the Triple Alliance, and then the Triple Entente, which was France, Russia, and Great Britain, were kind of three countries that said, hey, something happens, we're gonna take care of each other, right? Imperialism is the stronger nations who were looking to expand on their empires and get new markets. Well, they were competing. So as those nations began competing, well, sometimes that's going to lead to war, right? And then nationalism. Certainly, some countries thought they were inherently better than other countries, so it was natural that they take them over. So once again, there's going to be four main long-term causes. When I say main, M for militarism, A for the alliance systems, I for imperialism, and then N for nationalism. All right, so we know 1917, the United States is going to end up entering that war. So we're going to take a quick peek at the events that were happening before America entered and try to figure out why we got in there. All right, so there's some cultural and ethnic links certainly to Europe. Many of the immigrants who came from various countries who were involved in these conflicts, and they kind of had to decide to pick a side. So the official position of the United States was we were trying to maintain our status as being neutral, but very few Americans were actually truly neutral. All right, so who were the Americans who sympathized with the Central Powers? So if I go back to that map, once again, who are the Central Powers? They're in the center of Europe. So Germany, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire and the Turks. Italy, you'll see here, is kind of with the Allies. They start out with the Central Powers, and then late in the war, they jump ship and join the Allies. So who's going to side with the Central Powers? Where there were German Americans, they were tied to Germany because that's their heritage, that's the original country, right? Then you have some Irish Americans, and they were kind of against the British. The Irish and British tended not to get along for many years, so they kind of tended to side with those Central Powers as well, all right? There were Americans who favored the Allies, probably a lot more of them as well, or the Triple Entente, or that alliance system. So Americans had cultural ties with Great Britain, the founding of our nation, the early colonial period. These people came from Great Britain. So many Americans felt that we should be loyal to France, who helped us out during the American Revolution. So we were kind of friends with Britain and friends with France, but we got these German Americans who want to be with Germany. So officially we were neutral, but when you look at the intangibles here, it was pretty difficult to maintain that neutrality, right? Well, we have some economic ties, all right? The British actually blockaded Europe, so they wouldn't let any goods into Europe, and that really hurt our economy because profits really dropped from, just look at the numbers here. We were making $345 million in 1914 to only making $29 million in 1916. So because of the British blockade and because we didn't have access to European markets, we weren't selling as many goods as we used to, and therefore we weren't making as much money as we could have. So it'd be really good for us to get this war over so that we can resume our trade, right? U.S. exports to Europe, obviously specifically to Germany, that number is going down. So we're going to lose that trade. The other nations was okay with going up, but I mean, we're losing this down here. So we may have to get in there to fix that. So definitely some propaganda. The Allies continued to send propaganda via what's known as the transatlantic cable. So we were getting information from the war, but it was kind of one-sided. It was only from the Allies' point of view. The Allies depicted the war as it was basically the democratic countries against the barbaric monarchy of the Germans, and they really demonized the Germans and made them out to be the enemy there, right? So this is a song that inspired all America. What is it? Wake up, America. What are they saying? Join the war. Help us out, right? So wake up, America. Civilization calls. Every man, woman, and child, please come and help win the war. So one of the biggest issues, though, that is really going to spur American development would be the freedom of the seas issue. And that is the Germans began to submarine certain ships to destroy the British blockade. So in 1915, Germany announced that their U-boats would sink any enemy ship in the war zone around Britain. So if it's a ship they don't like, it's pretty simple. They torpedo it. Well, this became the single most important reason for American entrance into that war, into World War I. Woodrow Wilson insisted, this is a huge issue, that a neutral nation had the right to trade with anybody they want. And no other country, no matter if they were at war or not, should interfere with that trade. So that kind of got Wilson going, right? So you see, you have your little German submarines there, right? Well, so what are the true events that lead us up into? Well, February 1st, Germany announces a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. So they're not going to warn ships. They're just going to torpedo them if they don't like them. Well, February 3rd, we break off our relations with Germany because we're not happy with their policy here, and then it happens. On March 1st, we intercept what's known as the Zimmermann Note or the Zimmermann Telegram. And what it is German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a note to Mexico. Okay, what did the note say? It urged for an alliance between Germany and Mexico. And what Germany explained in this telegram is that they would help Mexico regain all of their lost territories. So the territories that the Americans took from Mexico, which would be Texas, California, New Mexico, and Arizona. Well, that message was made public, and it got us going. We were pretty tuned up at the fact that Germany would try to get Mexico to attack us. On March 5th, there was some U.S. merchant ships were being sunk by torpedoes, and then yeah, here it is, right? Here's a German guy, here's a little Mexican guy. Join with Germany and you will get a bit of the United States, right? Some big promise, right? That's kind of the Zimmermann telegram. The Lusitania, famous ship, World War I. The first thing you need to know about it, it is not an American ship, it is a British passenger ship. That is important because what is aboard that ship? A bunch of people. And the German U-boats torpedoed and sunk that ship in 1915. So we don't join the war until 1917. So it can be a cause of war, but it's not the cause of the war. What happens aboard that ship? There were 128 Americans, and they died. They perished. The Germans killed 128 Americans. So public opinion in the United States really shifts. It says, hey, maybe we should go to war against Germany. So there's a nice New York Times headline, Lusitania sunk by a submarine, right? What is our role? Well, we do end up entering the war in 1917. But before that, our president said, hey, if we end up getting in this thing, we want to be ready. So what did he do? Two laws come out before we enter the war. The National Defense and the Navy Act. So what did it do? It basically just expanded the amount of people that were in our Army and Navy. Why? If we wanted to go to war, we wanted to make sure we had the people to do that, right? And you need people and you need money. So the 1916 Revenue Act, what does it do? It passed by Congress to say, hey, we're going to appropriate certain dollars and we're going to make sure that we are ready to go. We have enough money and people to do this, all right? Some people volunteer, but to make sure that there were enough soldiers, there was something known as a military draft. So what we're going to deal with here is simply the draft issue. Number one, our government can institute a military draft. Right? Some actually, people in America favor the draft. They said, hey, we're going to go, we're going to fight for democracy, we're going to help out our colleagues and our allies, Britain and France, so we should do it. Some people absolutely oppose the draft, saying it's an example of the rich and educated exercising their power over the poor. So there were certain deferments that you might be able to get if you had enough money, right? Well, What happens in May 1917? What we know as the Selective Service Act established a military draft. All males between the ages of 18 to 45 absolutely have to register for the draft. The Supreme Court actually upheld the draft as being constitutional. Constitutional. Well, once we get our boys together, both people who are drafted and the people who volunteer, and we train them, they are known as the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. And what that was is the name given to all the American servicemen during World War I. So just to give you the numbers, 4.8 million Americans served, 2.8, so more than half of those are going to be what? Draftees. They're going to be people who were forced to go and fight, and that was legal, right? The AEF was led by General John J. Pershing, right? So we got enough guys to fight, but we got to get people at home to push for this war. So there you go. You got your little servicemen, John J. Pershing, giving them a little button them up, getting them going, right? Well, how can we get people who are not going to war actually support the war? And this is known as the War Industries Board, or the WIB. And they coordinated the purchasing of war supplies. They encouraged companies to produce products that were going to help with that war. And they tried to eliminate any type of waste because we didn't want to run out of everything or any products we needed. So you found there's a War Industries Board, right, to get us ready. And they're going to put out little propaganda to keep those companies producing those products. So they did a good job, and we were well prepared for that war. Well, what about people? Can people help? Wilson believed that this was the war to end all wars, and we're fighting this war to make the entire world safe for democracy. So the Committee on Public Information really promoted this idea and encouraged people to do whatever they could to help. So how could the average bear, mom sitting at home who's not in a war help? Well, you can purchase some Liberty bonds. You can conserve resources, meatless Tuesdays, wheatless Wednesdays, and run the nation. You might even foster some anti-German or anti-immigrant feelings. So you can imagine the posters that are popping up around here, right? If you can't enlist, invest. What are they telling you? Buy a Liberty bond. Help the country. Save the wheat, help the fleet. Nice, it rhymes, it's catchy. What are they asking you? Eat less bread. More bread for the troops, right? And then, there it is. Beat back the Hun, the angry German here, right? That's who we're fighting. We're going to beat back those Germans with buying Liberty bonds. So you have those kind of propaganda posters that pop up to get people to do what they need to do, right? What they do to help win the war. The issue is, as we go into this war, there are certain constitutional issues, and that is, what are we going to do with people's rights? What are we going to do about women who are now going to factories who still don't have the right to vote? And this is a famous image of two suffragettes saying, hey, we want our freedoms just like everybody else. So what is the opposition? Well, many prominent Americans were against the war. So Robert La Follette, Jane Addams, kind of a pacifist, was against the war. Anyone opposing that war became suspected. They might be un-American. So people with German backgrounds, certain immigrants, people who were labeled as socialist or pacifist were kind of targeted. And they were people that the government wanted to keep their eye on to make sure they were going to do the right thing for the country. All right. Nativism was expressed through a law, 1917 law, where it forced some literacy tests. Why? They're designed to restrict immigrants' entry into the United States. What specific immigrants? Well, the countries we were fighting. So Germany, Austria, Hungarians, anyone who were from the old leftover Ottoman Empire. So we were really concerned about these people because we were in the midst of a war with them, right? There are two laws the government really comes out with here that kind of raise a stink in our nation. And the one is the Espionage Act, and the other is the Sedition Act. So the Espionage Act made it a crime to interfere with the military draft and allowed the Postmaster General to bar treasonous materials in the mail. So they're kind of censoring our speech and making sure you don't interfere with the draft. Well, the next one's kind of a bigger issue. The Sedition Act of 1918 made it a crime, listen to this, to speak or publish anything disloyal, profane, or abusive about the United States government. Don't talk about the government. Don't talk about the Constitution. Don't mess with the flag. Can't talk bad about the military. So really, what did this do here? It limited freedoms of speech. Well, what are the results? Over 2,000 Americans were actually prosecuted, and at least 1,500 or more are going to end up in jail because they broke the law. So the issue is, are these laws good laws or bad laws? And we're going to find that out in this case right here. Schenck versus the United States. All right. So Charles Schenck, to give you an idea here, he was a German-American citizen. And he went around with little pamphlets telling people not to go to the draft, don't go fight the Germans. And he got arrested. Okay. So it's a 1919 Supreme Court case where they ruled. They said that guy should have been arrested. It was legal for the government to do it. And what are they saying in this case? That your freedom of speech can be restricted during wartime. What's more important here, Mr. Schenck? Winning the war or your freedom of speech? And our United States Supreme Court made a decision. And what was more important was winning the war. So what did they say? This is the court's kind of language here. Free speech doesn't protect a man from falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater. Why? That's going to cause a panic and somebody could get hurt. So our Supreme Court has to put a value on safety versus freedoms. And at this particular moment, they said that people's safety is more important than your freedom of speech. So they limited that, right? Speech can be restrained if the words could cause a clear and present danger. So in short, you can say whatever you want to say, but you cannot say something that might cause someone any harm. And just keep that as a rule of thumb, right? If you need the vocabulary for the Red Scare, you can pause that. I'm going to continue on to the slides so we can keep moving here. So what is the Red Scare? Well, November in 1917, a group known as the Bolsheviks or the Communists took control of Russia. Why do we care? Well, we have a lot of citizens in America who are originally from Russia. So there's a fear, there's a distrust of these foreigners in America. So we are going to look for, we are going to target, we're going to do a little research on them, we're going to hunt them down because we fear that they're going to do something un-American. So what groups of people were we talking about here? Anyone advocating socialist ideas, anarchist ideas, labor leaders, immigrants, anybody who immigrated from those communist countries now, and we want to find out if they're with us or against us. And some of these people are going to be arrested and thrown in jail. Some of them are going to be thrown out of the country. Right? Well, the war is over pretty quick. So what we have here is we want to find at the end of the war the search for peace and the search to make sure this doesn't happen again. And one of the leading speakers is going to be this gentleman right here, Woodrow Wilson. So what he does is he is at the peace conference in Paris, and it's known as the Treaty of Versailles, and he comes up with a plan that he calls his 14 points. So he has a list of things he wants to see happen. I wouldn't suggest you go study all of them, but maybe take a peek at the big ones, right? So what are parts of his 14 points? Number one, open, not secret diplomacy. Countries should not be speaking behind closed doors. Keep everything on the open so there's no worries. Everybody knows what's going on. Freedom of the seas, no more torpedo in a ship that you don't like. You should be able to put things on a ship, people or products, and ship them wherever you want on the oceans. Getting rid of trade barriers would open up the global economy and hopefully lead to more global competition rather than barriers, right? An arms reduction sounds like a great idea. If each country has less weapons, there's less a chance of an overall war. Self-determination was an idea that some European nations did not have, and they were advocating for. That is, letting the national groups who live in that area make their own political decisions. So those are all kind of the feel-good issues. And then here's the bullet. Here's the big one. Wilson wanted to create an association of nations to guarantee political independence, territorial integrity, and a place where nations could go to talk about their problems rather than fighting over their problems. And that will be known as the League of Nations. All right, so he's got a great plan. Well, what happens to the plan? There's all of the 14 points. So you can kind of take a peek at that if you like. But like I said, you don't need to study the preservation of Belgian sovereignty. You know, we're just kind of learning U.S. history here. But for a global studies class or a world history class, those would be more important, right? So there's your vocab for your sheet. If you need to fill it out, pause it, and then you can have that. But what is this Treaty of Versailles now? It is ratified. The Allied powers do not listen to Wilson and all of his points. So what the Treaty of Versailles did is kind of well versed in history, and Germany basically had to do all of the following, and they were certainly not going to be able to. But they had to accept complete responsibility for causing the war. They were the guilty party. They had to accept that. There were other reasons. We know what the main causes were, but Germany got the blame. They had to pay huge reparations to the Allies. I think it was like $83 billion that they didn't have. So I mean, it's just not going to happen. Give up all of its military forces. They were reduced to like a mere police force. It was terrible. Cede lands to the new nations of Poland and Czechoslovakia. So they lost a bunch of territory that they once had. Give up all of its overseas colonies. And create the League of Nations to deal with our issues. So Germany is in a bad way, both economically and because they lost the war and their nation is all war torn. But they have to accept these conditions that are really going to sow the seeds pretty much for World War II, right? So here's the League of Nations. Everybody's in there, and what is it showing you? These countries are still going to be what? They're going to be fighting, right? Why? The League of Nations is Woodrow Wilson's idea, but we do not join. All right? Why? Because the president can propose any treaty he wants, but our Senate actually ratifies the treaty. So in this particular instance, our Senate did not ratify the treaty. Why? Joining the League of Nations could involve the United States in the future wars. And we were moving on to more of an isolationist feeling at that time. The U.S. may be forced to provide troops for other countries, and they didn't want to do that. And after we got sucked into World War I, there was a feeling that, hey, maybe we should kind of peel back here and take care of what's going on at home. So move to more of an isolated nation. So that's pretty much the end of World War I for American involvement. Take your time, maybe watch this again if you need it, but pay attention to the things that were happening at home during that war and the treaty for sure. So good luck, and we'll see you in the future.